Okay, welcome back, folks. Another installment of Bio 104. So we've gone through two themes. Hope you're getting the handle of how this class works in terms of keeping up with the reading, trying to make sense of a given theme. You know, how all these different topics are sort of jumbled but then made into a narrative about a given theme. And the next theme that we're going to talk about here is stress and addiction. Okay, this is obviously another very relevant topic. Everybody's stressed these days. I feel like I'm at the breaking point these days. And this is not really something to laugh at. We've kind of always poo-poo having high levels of stress. Sometimes in this country, I think it's even considered kind of a badge of honor. The more stressed you are, the more successful you're going to be. It's just dangerous idea. We're going to talk about stress and about how this leads to another, really just a disorder called addiction. And this is our way of learning a little bit about the human body, learning about the brain and the way that the nervous system works, but also learning about hormones and the way the endocrine system works. And so this is kind of like the human anatomy and physiology. We'll talk about genetics, so that goes back to the cancer theme. We'll talk about cells. And so please, download the study questions. Those are listed here. You can see those here. Today we're going to go through the first lecture. That's all these questions outlined in gray here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 lectures in this theme. Good lecture. I like this theme. It's something I think about a lot. I have a lot of addiction in my family. My biological father's an alcoholic and addict. He's going through this right now, in fact, in a hospital in Arizona. And so, it's a relevant topic. My brother's an alcoholic too. So it's something I've thought a lot about, and I think that understanding the biology of all of this is helpful to try to empathize with what people are going through. So I hope you feel the same. So this is the first lecture. We're going to start with the first study question. Is, again, this theme is really largely about the nervous system. So this is a organ system. It's several organs working together. And so organs are made up of tissue, and tissues are made up of cells. Just like all the other cells we talked about at the beginning of the class. A neuron is a type of cell. It has all the same basic components of those other cells that we've learned about. But they're specialized for one thing, and that is conducting impulses. Right, so their function is to conduct impulses, and we're going to see their form really fits with that. So there's a lot of different types of neurons, but there's some commonalities too. Okay, so let's look at those neurons. So here's your cell. That at first glance, this thing is just unrecognizable as a cell. It looks more like some kind of alien thing. But when you really start to look at it, focusing in on this part, the cell body it's called, we see there's the nucleus, there's the Golgi apparatus, there's the mitochondria undergoing respiration, and then all in here are the ribosomes. So this cell acts just like all the other cells that we've talked about when we talked about cancer, and we talked about DNA and messenger RNA and ribosomes and proteins. Same story in these type of cells. In fact, if you think about it, this is where brain cells, if they start to undergo mutation in their cell cycle genes, that's where you get brain tumors. So it would be this type of cell, a neuron, if that undergoes those mutations. That's how you get things like brain cancer. So, okay, different parts of this cell. Cell body is where you find the nucleus and most of the organelles. And then on this end we have these things called dendrites, and you'll see that these dendrites form connections with multiple other neurons. Okay, so it's not just one neuron to another in connection. Nerve cells connect with maybe up to hundreds of other nerve cells, okay, through those dendrites. And then the cell body, and then we have this long part here called the axon. Okay, and that is basically kind of what you would expect, which is a kind of long distance signal. So that the signal is received here on the dendrite end. It moves through the cell body along the axon to these synaptic terminals, and then on the other side of the synaptic terminal would be another neuron. Okay, so the impulse moves in this direction. We're going to talk about the nature of that signal, how it's generated, but for now we're just looking at the direction and the different parts of the cell and their role in sending that signal. Another cell type that's found in the brain, they're called glial cells. They kind of feed the neurons. We have this other, it's not a cell, but a material called myelin. And myelin is a type of protein that coats the axon of a nerve cell. And really it acts basically like a coat on a wire. So if this is a neuron, right, and the point of this cable is, this is my wife's iPhone cable, would be, we plug this end into the wall and then it sends electricity through the cable, and then this would plug into your phone. And what's the point of having this coating on there is so that the electricity does not jump from the wall plug-in to your finger and shock you. It doesn't jump to another wire and short out your electrical system, and it actually helps to speed up the rate at which the electricity moves through the wire. And the myelin sheath is really no different. Okay, this is helps the signal pathway to move more quickly and more efficiently between neuron cells. So that's the myelin. Myelinated parts of the brain, that's what we call gray matter, because they have myelin. Okay, the nervous system is broke up into two main parts. We've got the central and the peripheral nervous system. And the central nervous system you think is in the middle, and that would be your brain and your spinal cord. Peripheral, or sort of on the outside of the nervous system, are all of the other accessory nerves. Okay, and what is a nerve? Again, you guys, if you get the chance to go to the Bodies exhibit down at Atlantic Station, I really recommend it. It's pretty wild, and there's one exhibit there. If you walk into this room, you see it's basically a brain with two eyeballs on it, and then you can see that this is, I think, actual nervous tissue from a human body, and they dissected out all of the nervous tissue, so you'd see the spinal cord and all of these accessory nerves coming out. Pretty wild. But those nerves are basically just a bundle of neuronal cells. Okay, so this the neuron that we saw in the last slide, a whole bunch of those things working together in a tissue, those are what we see as nerves. And I know you're somewhat familiar with these nerves. There's all different kind of nerves. Sciatica, the optic nerve that supplies your eyeballs. You have nerves radiating out through your shoulder, down your arms. You have them radiating from your spinal column into your organs like your stomach and your intestines. And then you've got them running down your legs all the way down to your feet. Okay. Central nervous system, pretty easy. That's the brain and the spinal cord. Okay. Peripheral nervous system are all the other nerves that run from the central nervous system. So this kind of makes them look like they're separate, but they actually are all connected. So, right, what is the point of the nervous system? Not all animals have nervous systems. Not all living things have nervous systems. This is something that evolved later in development of animals, and it allowed animals to become larger and become more complex because the nervous system is sort of like the MC. It controls and coordinates the different parts of the body so that everybody's working together to respond to the environment. So, example here, mosquito lands on you, inserts its proboscis, and actually I believe that they do have some kind of anesthetic on their mouth parts that make you less likely to feel the mosquito, but then what is you start to get an allergic reaction at that site of the mosquito. So you start to feel that. You feel pain, discomfort, a little itching, right? That sensory nerve is part of the peripheral nervous system. The message is sent along a bundle of these neuron fibers or neuronal cells, and right, probably up the spinal column to the brain. The brain receives those signals to a certain part of the brain, and it integrates that input. It will make a decision and some type of thought that forms a reaction, and then that reaction is sent out back to the peripheral nervous system, and then we have a motor output. So in other words, your muscle contracts in a coordinated fashion and you slap the mosquito. So it's a really seemingly simple process, but there's a lot going on that needs to happen for you to swat and kill a mosquito. Okay. So if you were into robotics and you had to program a robot to do that one seemingly simple task, it would be very complex. Okay, so we see that as an example of the peripheral and the central nervous system working together. Peripheral, sensory and motor inputs and outputs. Central nervous system is the integration and formation of a response. Okay, so this implies again movement from the arm where the mosquito is up to the brain, back down to another arm that is used to swat the mosquito. So that is a signal that moves through the nervous system. Okay, and so we're going to talk about those signals. They are caused by, at the cellular level, this thing called an action potential. Okay, so the neuron in resting state has what we call resting potential, and this all has to do with voltage charges, negative and positive ions moving in and out. So this really is an electrical type of a system. In fact, that's how a lot of animals find their prey, is they're detecting minute electrical impulses from the nervous system. That's what actually the hammerhead shark, the whole head is all about, chemo and electroreception. So this signal is, again, related to electricity. At rest, the neuron has one charge, but during the formation of a nervous signal or nerve impulse, we see movement of these ions or charged particles in and out of cells, and that is what creates the change in voltage and therefore the electrical or the nerve impulse. Let's look at some pictures. Okay, that'll probably make more sense to you. So here's the 4 steps that have to happen for a nerve impulse to be generated. This upper left here, neuron interior, this is basically the inside of, you could say like an axon, that long part of the neuronal cell. The yellow is the plasma membrane. Okay, we talked about the cell membrane. Every cell has this membrane. That's kind of one of the things that makes a cell a cell, is it's separated from the outside by the membrane. The membrane lets some things in and out easily. Other things don't move across the membrane easily. And any kind of charged particle, shown here is the positive and negative. These are ions. They do not move naturally through or passively through the membrane. So while a neuron is resting, so say you know, really any neuron, it has a positive external environment and a negative internal environment. Now, if there's some kind of a some type of stimulus that starts a nerve impulse, then what happens is there are little channels or little gates through the plasma membrane that allow those ions to move through the membrane. Okay, so over here on the left, top left, positive on the outside, negative on the inside. Why do they not diffuse? Because of the yellow plasma membrane. But now some kind of stimulus has created an opening. These little channels open up and the positive ions rush in, okay? And the negative ions move out. And so this is called depolarization. So the charge of the neuron switches very quickly, okay? And then that moves and spreads down along the axon of the neuron, and that's what is really the nature of that nerve impulse. Okay, once the nerve impulse has moved and done its job, then the resting potential is restored by closing those gates and then selectively allowing the positive ions to flow back out. Okay, resting, stimulus, positive ions start moving in, rushing in really, and then negative ions moving out, and that causes the nerve impulse. And then the number 4 is basically restoring or the restoration of the resting state. Okay. It's a localized, this action potential is a localized event. Change from the resting potential at a specific place. So the local change has to be, here says propagated, which means that it has to be sent in like a wave. It needs to be maintained or sent down the length of the nerve cell, passed along the length of the neuron. Okay, so in this way you can think about action potential, this changing of electrical charge along a neuron is really like a domino, a stack of dominoes. Okay, and here's the picture. Okay, so here again, there's the stimulus, positive rushing in, negative rushing out. That's the change from the resting. At the top here, all this yellow is the resting potential. On the left here is the action potential. And it spreads down the length of the nerve cell as it goes, positive and negative switch, right? And so it's like you knock over a domino and it propagates a signal down the length of the nerve cell. And then if we remember back to that first diagram, number 4 was basically we return to the resting potential. And so it's like somebody comes back along behind and resets up the dominoes. Okay. Because we need nerve cells, it's not one and done kind of thing. They send a signal and then they have to return to being ready to send another signal. Okay. So these signals move down the length of one individual nerve, and then in order to get from the finger up to the brain, there's not one single cell in that long pathway. Remember that nerve fibers are probably thousands, at least hundreds of thousands of nerves that are stacked up end to end to end, all the way from the hand all the way to the brain. Okay, so that nerve impulse needs to continue from cell to cell to cell to cell in order to really make the nervous system work. Okay, but it's a little bit more complex. Everything's always more complex in this class, I know, but it's a little more complex because the nerves are actually not in physical contact with each other, right? So in order for that nerve impulse to pass from one neuron to the other, right, there's this thing called a synapse. It says here it's a relay point between a neuron and a receiving cell, between a neuron and a neuron, but it's actually a physical gap. Okay, and we're going to see that there are two different types of synapses, and there's electrical and chemical. We're going to spend more time on the chemical impulses, the chemical synapses. So we'll see that's much more relevant to our discussion of drugs and addiction and stress. But suffice to say that there are electrical and chemical synapses. And the adaptive reasoning for this, or the positive, or the reason why we have those two, is sometimes you need a very quick reaction, and you don't really, it's not complex, it's just a very simple, quick reaction. So a good example of this would be like a reflex. So if you put your hand on a stove, you don't really, there's not a complex reaction that's needed. We don't need to send the impulse up to the brain, and then with the brain's up there like, what should we do? Well, let's look at our emotions and our past. No, really, we just need to get our hand off of the stove. So what a reflex is, it moves from the finger through electrical synapses very quick to the spinal cord and back to the finger. Okay, so we bypass the brain and we move through electrical synapses very quickly, and the simple response is to draw your finger back. Now, because we are so complex, and there's a lot of really subtle type things that our brain does for us, we also have to have these chemical synapses. So they allow for more nuanced reactions. So in that way, they're better than a simple reaction for many situations. The downside here, the trade-off, is that they work very slowly. Okay, so let's look into those chemical synapses. Okay, and again, what is the big picture here? Here's one nerve cell. Here's another nerve cell. Okay, we're focusing in, but looking at more than one cell. This again normally involves hundreds or thousands of cells, but here we're just simplifying to say, here's the signal. It's moving from left to right. It's moving along the cell body, down the axon to the synaptic terminals. It needs to get over to these dendrites of the next receiving cell. The problem is that we take this little box and zoom in on it. Here's that impulse coming down from the sending neuron, and we need that impulse to be propagated and be sent along to the next cell. The problem is right here. This is a actual vacuum. There's no physical connection between these nerves. Okay, that's the synapse. And we're going to see this is where the magic really happens, is in the synapse. And in that synapse, we have these chemicals called neurotransmitters. Okay, neurotransmitters. And we're going to look at these 6 steps whereby the chemical synapse helps to propagate this nerve impulse. Okay, so here's the impulse. How does it continue over here? Okay, so we'll go through those step by step, and then I'm going to kind of focus in on the relevance or significance of these synapses and neurotransmitters. Okay, number 1, here comes the nerve impulse. We have the depolarization. Positive flowing in, negative flowing out, positive, negative, positive, negative. Comes down the neuron. We need to send it to the next neuron, otherwise we've kind of, it's not going to do its job, because we need that signal to be, trying to think of a word, I can't think of it. I just keep coming up propagated, but we need the signal to continue. Okay, so the action potential arrives, number 1. Number 2, we have these little vesicles. So what is this yellow stuff? This is that plasma membrane, which is like a lipid. It's like consistency of olive oil, they say it. This is some of that same material, but in a little bubble containing these chemicals. So this vesicle moves down to the synaptic cleft. The vesicle fuses. What's it fuses with? It fuses with the plasma membrane of the neuron. Okay, and when it does that, the chemicals burp out into the synapse. Okay. 3, neurotransmitter released. Released where? Into the synapse. Number 4, the chemical crosses the synapse, and then we have to have a receptor on the other side of the synapse. Okay, it binds to the receptor, number 4. Then number 5, here's that neurotransmitter. There's the receptor. It's bound together. When this binds to the receptor, it opens a ion channel, right? So what do you suppose this is flowing into this cell, right? Those are those positive ions flowing in, continuing down, continuing that action potential, right? Now, action reaction, right? We have sent the impulse. Now we need to prepare the sending neuron to do this again and again and again. So we basically, this is number 6, is like the reset button. The channel closes, no more positives can flow in, and there's another set of channels that allow the positive to flow out, the negative to flow in. We return to resting potential. Okay, so here's that neurotransmitter. If it continues to stay here, then the channel stays open, and the nerve impulse will just continue and continue. So the neurotransmitter is removed. We're going to see it can either be broken down, it may be sent back to the sending nerve, but whatever happens, it is no longer attached to this receptor, and therefore the channel closes. So those are the 6 steps whereby a chemical neurotransmitter cause a impulse to cross the synapse. Okay. So a lot of work there just to explain this system, and this is the who the hell cares part of it. And this actually is the really interesting part of this. So those neurotransmitters, right, are very complex. You can have one given neurotransmitter, like dopamine, that may affect a whole bunch of different cell types in your body. the neurotransmitter will not affect a cell if the cell does not have a receptor for it. And there are some neurotransmitters that have receptors only on really specific types of cells. Like maybe a neurotransmitter only works on the brain, maybe it only works on the intestines, maybe it only works on the liver or something like that. Does it act on an organ? Well, that depends on if that organ cells have the receptor on there. Okay, so for example, dopamine, it is involved with things like pleasure. It's involved with your ability to pay attention, ability to form memories, ability to learn. It's involved with movement and sleep. Very complex neurotransmitter in terms of its action on the human body. And a lot of that, again, is because of where the receptors are. Who cares about neurotransmitters? Well, most pharmaceuticals, well, a lot of pharmaceutical drugs act on this system. They interfere with this system. Depression is not just I feel a little down today, I'm so depressed. Depression is a clinical, physical disorder that people deal with. It has varying levels of depression. You can have serious depression, you can have slight depression, but it's caused by we hear people say, oh, so-and-so has a chemical imbalance. Well, this is the chemicals that we were referring to in that statement, these neurotransmitters. Serotonin is directly related to depression. Parkinson's disease. I don't know if you guys have ever seen or know anybody with Parkinson's disease. I think Matthew J. Fox has Parkinson's. My grandfather had Parkinson's. Causes tremors, causes hallucinations. Eventually, people just suffocate. It's caused by a lack of dopamine. Schizophrenia. Everyone, I think, is aware of schizophrenia. Horrible disease, right? Just having a hard time differentiating reality from hallucination, is linked to excessive amount of dopamine. Okay. Oh, good Lord. It's a giant stick bug on me. That's a little crazy. I'm sitting here giving a presentation and then a stick bug crawling up my leg. So anyways, diseases, but particularly a lot of what we would call mental health disorders, mental disorders are caused by imbalance of neurotransmitters. And so some of our pharmaceutical drugs work by acting on these neurotransmitters. Again, thinking of the complexity of this, here's one of those cell bodies. Here is the dendrites. This one nerve cell may be integrated with hundreds or dozens of other nerve cells, all having various amounts of input, sending different neurotransmitters at different times in response to... Damn it, what in the hell? To different stimuli. Okay. Now, so if that doesn't convince you that neurotransmitters are important, then almost all of our recreational drugs have a connection to neurotransmitters too. So nicotine, alcohol, caffeine, all of these things act and affect your, they would be called psychoactive drugs. They act on neurotransmitters. So example, caffeine, we have these certain neurotransmitters like GABA or adenosine act to inhibit your body, which again, this makes sense. If you are overworking your body, then there are neurotransmitters that basically send the signal, which is adaptive, to just slow down, relax, go to sleep, repair your body, right? Clear some stress hormones, just like a reset is to sleep. What caffeine does is it inhibits, or it destroys, it slows down the action of those neurotransmitters. So, by doing so, you don't feel the effects of exhaustion and being tired. So that's an example of how a stimulant basically inhibits or stops inhibitory neurotransmitters. Prescription drugs. Many people in this country take SSRIs. These are things like Zoloft, and they are used to treat depression and anxiety. And so let's look at this little video. It shows you how these drugs can work, right? And by acting on neurotransmitters. Okay, so these are, again, this class of drugs called SSRIs.
The human brain has about 10 billion brain cells. Each brain cell can have as many as 25,000 connections with other cells. Messages, which direct many functions throughout your body, travel through your brain from cell to cell through these connections. For these signals to move from a sending cell to a receiving cell, they must cross a small gap called the synapse. Chemicals called neurotransmitters, located at the ends of the sending cells.
The yellow shows the impulse coming down, being transmitted.
Is one such neurotransmitter, a very important one that helps regulate mood, emotions, and other body functions. After the serotonin has done its job, it's reabsorbed by the sending cell.
That would be that number 6, right? The reset.
To help with the next nerve signal. If you have depression, you may have a serotonin imbalance. Your overall level of serotonin may be low, and some of it may be reabsorbed too soon. As a result, communication between the brain cells is impaired. An SSRI, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, is a medication designed to help increase the amount of serotonin in the synapse by blocking its reabsorption.
Okay. SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So this pretty much tells you what the drug does. What does it do? It inhibits the reuptake of serotonin. Here's the serotonin, these little bubbles. It comes down, crosses the synapse, is received by this other neuron. The impulse goes along and makes you not depressed. If you don't have enough serotonin, then you don't have enough of the signal here, and then you're depressed. Okay, you don't have the willpower to make decisions. You don't have the energy to face day to day, all the things that go along with depression. And so one way to overcome that is to stop this serotonin from being reuptaken by the sending nerve. And so what that does is it basically effectively increases the amount of serotonin in the synapse, which should lead to less depressive
As serotonin
symptoms.
builds up, normal communication between cells can resume, and your symptoms of depression may improve.
Okay, so that, again, point being, our mental health, which is just as important as our physical health and is inextricably linked with our physical health, is related to these neurons. Okay. We'll talk about drugs of abuse, and these are two of the big ones here. Amphetamines, right? This is speed, and then cocaine. they basically act directly on the dopamine part of your brain, and the dopamine is involved with pleasure. So amphetamines and cocaine, they work differently, but in the end, what they result in is an increased amount of dopamine in your brain, which just gives you great pleasure. LSD, mescaline, these are two hallucinogenic drugs, not really drugs of abuse. These are not addictive drugs per se. They act in a very different manner, and they act on serotonin, activating high amounts of serotonin. Marijuana, again, it is involved with these neurotransmitters that are really basically natural cannabinoids that are found in our brains already, and the cannabinoid molecules in marijuana sort of mimic them, and the effect here is maybe slowing pain, decreasing pain, increasing appetite, decreasing memory. So lots of effects. Marijuana, the plant, contains lots of different chemicals, and they have a large kind of spectrum of effects on the brain. So all these fun things here are related to the brain and neurotransmitters. So that's why we have to talk about them when we talk about addiction. Because we're going to see, basically, this is the story of addiction. This is the story of intoxication. This is the story of stress. It's all related to these neurotransmitters. So this is, again, the sort of the background, baseline information that you need to know to understand how it is that somebody would, choose to live in Mexico and never have an interest in their children or their grandchildren. It's very difficult to reconcile somebody that you love as just their behavior and their choices that they make. And I think that the only way that it can make sense is you start to understand the biology of what's going on. And I think it may be, it's still difficult to excuse people's behavior, but I think it makes it easier to empathize with what people are going through when you understand what's going on inside of their brain. So we'll keep building up to that. Look for Lecture 2 soon. Do the reading. Struggle through this stuff. You guys have got to get down the vocabulary. Spend some time with those reading questions. Make yourself some note cards. Go through, do the mastering. I see people that are doing that are getting A's on every test. Okay, I can see how much time you guys are spending on these different tasks, and it's just directly proportional. The more time you put in, the better you're going to do. Okay, so just that's my little cheerleading for the evening. So